And of course, Shirley Patton.
All right, welcome. Thank you all for coming today. We're really excited to be a part of the Women's History Month, and the easiest way, or one of the things that we thought would be most interesting, was to learn about women of the area. And we are calling it the mythical state of Jefferson, not just the Rogue Valley, because we have brought some ringers in from Northern California. As Dennis mentioned, As It Was started in 1992 as a collaboration between Southern Oregon Historical Society and Jefferson Public Radio. And Carol Barrett was the first writer of the scripts, and she wrote over 1,200 of them. And Hank Henry was the announcer. He was the host and producer and did a wonderful job. And when he passed away, the series stopped in 2003. Well, that didn't last long because everybody wanted it back. So in 2005, they started up again with the new host, Shirley Patton, who has been reading these stories. A new one is written every day, Monday through Friday, since 2005. They're over almost up to 4,000 scripts. And it was sort of interesting because they did talk about controversial subjects were allowed as long as they were described with accuracy and objectivity. So we tried to find some of those. They're they're very popular stories, and we're so lucky. When Carol Barrett had so many of them, she put them together in a book, which we have on display here. It's called As It Was. We have many, many copies in the library system, which you can check out. You can check out any of the books that are on the display there, or put them on hold or pick them up at your local branch. But we have a lot of copies if you get so intrigued with our story reading that you want to carry it on. One thing that I've learned from Shirley, many things, talk about a little pressure, working with a woman who has been in the business for so long. We were practicing, she doesn't know I'm going to say this, we're practicing reading these stories, and I'm thinking, I kind of got this, you know, I read stories to my grandkids. And so we were reading them out loud to each other, and I said, so do you have any feedback? And she looked at me and she said, no, that was very good for a first read. And then she taught me about pausing, because coming from Chicago, I talk pretty fast and I can keep going excited. So anyway, I'm going to take a breath and we'll go through this. One thing she also mentioned that's very important, it's about the writers of this. She said, and let me just tell you,
Okay.
turn it over.
Oh. Well, the writers really deserve the credit for the success of As It Was, because they do all the hard work. They do the research, and then I think their most difficult task is chunking it all into 2 minutes. That's all the time they have. And the first story I'm going to read today, which is the first story there ever was, my internal timing gauge, which has developed, I don't think it quite fits muster. I think it's more expansive than the 2 minutes we have now. And any story that has a list is more difficult because you have to pause between items. And it's funny now, the clock starts ticking in my head and I realize, oh, gonna have to speed up. And Raymond has recorded some endings and beginnings of the show that are surely on jet propulsion. And so I am baffled and totally dumbfounded as to how Carol Barrett turned out a story for 5 days a week for the years she did it. And I'm glad we have a record of that in the book form.
Why don't you read the first one?
Okay, Amy. Do you have any comments for me now? So this is the very first one in the series, and you'll only hear the beginning with this one, then we'll just dive into the others. It deals with Abigail Jane Scott Duniway. The year was 1912. Welcome to As It Was, Tales from the Mythical State of Jefferson. In 1869, Wyoming was the first state in the Union to grant women the right to vote. Colorado soon followed, with Idaho and Utah adopting suffrage in 1896. It wasn't until 1912 that Oregon joined the bandwagon. Even so, it was 8 years before the U.S. Congress moved for national suffrage. On November 30th, 1912, Abigail Duniway became the first registered woman voter in Oregon and the first to cast a vote. She had worked for over 40 years to make this dream come true. In 1871, Abigail had begun the publication of the New Northwest, a weekly journal dedicated to equal suffrage. She helped organize the Oregon Equal Suffrage Association. Through their efforts, a bill to amend the state constitution and allow women to vote was brought before the legislature every 2 years, from 1906 until its passage in 1912. Abigail Scott Duniway was married to a man who supported her independence. She traveled throughout the state and came to Jacksonville in July 1879. Lecturing in the area for a week. Jacksonville was not friendly. Audiences threw eggs at her, and she was burned in effigy. Almost all the men and a surprisingly large number of women were against her. Sam and Huldah Culver of Phoenix were noted as broad-minded people and supported her efforts. They took Abigail into their home. It wasn't until August 20th, 1920, that the 19th Amendment was passed, giving women in all the states the right to vote. Shows you a little something about the need for perseverance if you want social change, doesn't it? Don't get discouraged. And women, fortunately, have always had allies in men in their lives, just as Abigail was supported by her husband. This one is called Early Oregonian Ponders Racism and Women's Rights. Samuel Hansacker quit school at the age of 11 and emigrated from England to Alton, Illinois. He lacked a formal education, but was a gifted writer and observer. Hansacker drove a team of oxen to Oregon, sending back tales of his adventures for publication in the Alton newspaper. He remained in Oregon, becoming the first butcher in Canyonville. In a 1908 memoir, he commented on racism and women's rights. He wrote in these words, "We all have cause to be thankful that we immigrated to this land of free schools and free homes where every man, and I sincerely wish that I could add every woman, has the right to suffrage." He added that contemporary opponents to women's suffrage would one day, in his words, hang their heads in shame to think that they said by their actions that their wife, mother, or sister was not as worthy to enjoy the rights of citizenship as are the millions of illiterate foreigners who come every year to our shores. It would be 12 years before women gained the right to vote, and 57 years before the passage of the Civil Rights Voting Act.
Wow. lot to say. One thing I'd like to mention on these stories that we're reading, you can read them online at the Jefferson Public Radio website or the Southern Oregon Historical Society website. And when you do read them online, there's a bibliography at the end of each one that tells where the information was received that the stories were based on. And as I was waiting for the talk to happen today, I started going, oh, of course, and we have photos around the room that pertain. There's one over in the corner of the plaza, some women's suffrage, or it's, what do they call it? The Women's Civic Improvement Club, which did so much in this town in 1905, and it shows them all on the plaza. So another thing that you might want to check out. Well, we talked, Shirley gave us a little background here on some of the politics. And when we were choosing these stories, we thought, okay, well, we should have the first legislator, the first voter, this first doctor. But also, what we need is, we need stories, an everyday story of what life was like for the women in the valley, in the area. What was it like for them? Well, here's one about the arrival of the first white woman and child to Humbug, and it was written by Gail Fiorini Jenner. And no matter the size of the print, I still will put these on. Gold mining camps were rough and tumble places with few women in the early stage of the rush to riches in Northern California and Southern Oregon. In the spring of 1853, miners passing along Humbug Creek in Siskiyou County spied some unusual clothing draped over bushes near a cabin that could only belong to a woman and child. The exciting news spread quickly, and by Sunday, at least 100 men dressed in clean woolen shirts and patched jeans stood in front of the cabin. Out of the group stepped a spokesman known as Old Uncle Gilbert, who hailed the cabin's residents. When they came out, Old Uncle Gilbert gave a little speech that went something like this. "My dear sir, you can be assured that your wife and child will be sacred objects to us and will be as safe from insult or danger as they would be within the limits of the capital of our country, surrounded by an army of police. We bid you welcome, and may God bless you, your wife and child." A hearty cheer rose from the other miners as they greeted the first white woman and child in Humbug Creek, California. And here's another early woman in the area, born in slavery. A woman becomes Oregon pioneer in 1852, and this was written by Pat Harper. Susanna Mask, believed to be the third child excuse me, of Dudley Mask of North Carolina and his slave Nellie, became an Oregon pioneer in 1852. Another slave owner purchased her mother when Susanna was 3 years old, and they were freed shortly thereafter. The mother fled with her family to Tennessee after the Nat Turner slave revolt. Susanna married when she was 15. By age 28, she was a widow with 5 children in Missouri. In 1852, Susanna and her children emigrated with her mother's family to Oregon. Susanna and her sister settled outside Jacksonville in near womanless one-horse town, later called Kanaka Flats, where they were welcomed by the miners living there. And as a side note out of the story, I did some background research on her because I found her very interesting. And they said that she and her sister were both beautiful, and they would walk up and down the streets and all the miners would step aside. Though they were beautiful, I'll go back to the story. Susanna's daughter, Mary Missouri Anna, was not welcome in Jacksonville's only school, where racist parents forced her dismissal. Susanna bore 3 children in One Horse Town before moving closer to relatives in the Shady Cove area. And in 1862, Susanna married George Weeks, and together they had 3 sons. By 1877, Susanna called herself a widow again, after Weeks abandoned her and moved to Montana. Susanna died in 1909 at the age of 86. And I was...
This is one of those stories where it poses more questions than answers, and you want to know more about this woman and what her daily life was like, and the bigger struggles and the triumphs. And I think the listeners feel the same thing too. Sometimes, you know, at the grocery store, someone will come up and say, I just heard this story, and what about that, and I'm not a historian, and I don't know. And I can just commend them to the website and the original materials. But earlier, you had a little cough, and I had trouble with my voice, and I thought, where's Raymond Scully now that we need him? Because when something like that happens during the recording session, we just stop, clear throats, hack away or whatever, and then resume. And if there's any quality to the show, it's because of Raymond Scully.
You know, another thing, when you were telling me that people often ask about this, and I thought I would look up information, there's a lot of information online about Susanna Mask, a lot in genealogy forums. And one of them, there's a show by a man named Henry Gates, who does a television show that follows often a celebrity. And he was doing an actor named Ty Burrell, who's from our area and is the star of Modern Family. And in his genealogy, he found he is related to Susanna Mask. But what about other women in the Valley?
Well, here's a story about a Karok woman that I think deserves attention. And, oh, I didn't tell you that Valerie Ng wrote the story about racism and civil rights. And this one is by Linda Dempscher. Oh, I'm so grateful to all those volunteers. Karok woman weaves variety of Rogue River baskets. Adeline Billings made useful and lasting baskets and hats for Rogue River Canyon dwellers after settling with her husband, John Billings, near Agnes, Oregon in 1868. A Karok native who grew up along the Klamath River, Adeline had learned basket weaving from her mother and how to find the grasses, brush, and roots for a wide variety of utilitarian baskets. Adeline had a dog and pony, and when her 10 children were older, she'd take off for several days into the deep forest and come home loaded down with weaving supplies. She used pine roots that swelled tight for water baskets, strong, pliable sticks from hazelnut trees for carrying baskets, and root dyes for fancy, colorful ones. Miners loved her straw hats because the expert weaving resisted wear. The miners hunted gold, but Adeline considered weaving to be her special gold mine, accepting only $5 gold pieces for her work. She made hundreds of items over 60 years, gradually wearing her teeth down by holding the grasses taut in her teeth. Adeline died in 1921, but some of her baskets still exist, confirmation that they were made to last. It's always like opening a surprise package when Kernan sends us the stories for the month ahead. Raymond and I get really excited about what are we going to find out about this month. And this is a story by Alice Mullally that deals with very much everyday people and concerns. Daughter likens strawberries to demanding mistress. Moving from the Southern California suburbs in 1946 to 23 acres east of Sutherland, Oregon, was an experience Doris Price never forgot. It started when her father saw an opportunity to make money and planted 3 acres in ever-bearing strawberries. Doris soon learned the meaning of stoop labor from long early mornings picking berries. When it was cold, her mother put a pan of hot water out to warm numb, frozen fingers. Doris called strawberries narcissistic because of the care they needed. She later wrote, "Like a homely, demanding mistress, they wouldn't let you off the hook." Runners had to be cut off and weeds pulled. As the last row was hoed, it was time to start over again on the first row. Then there were the insects. Root weevils devoured the plants from the bottom, spittle bugs from the top. Slugs, earwigs, ants, and birds took their share of the crop. The large, luscious berries became forbidden fruit reserved for buyers, leaving the family only the half-eaten berries the bugs and critters left behind. Doris was thankful when her dad took a job in a sawmill. I think any kid that's had to work in their parents' business can identify with Doris.
All right. Let's see where we're going now. Oh, here's a story that some of you have heard before. We did a whole program on this for the Windows in Time talk, and Dennis Powers gave quite a bit of information about it. We have files on this woman, Susie Jessel, upstairs in the reference department. There are published books on her and also a huge lot of clippings. But let me tell you in 2 minutes her story. Faith Healer Brings Fame to Ashland, Oregon, written by Kernan Turner. Not long after Faith Healer Susie Jessel moved in the early 1930s to Ashland, Oregon, people were waiting in line seeking a cure for whatever ailed them. She received them first at her home on Idaho Street and later at her Holly Street clinic. Her laying on of hands soon gained national attention through magazine articles with headlines like, "They Call Her the Miracle Woman," and "The Lady with the Healing Hands." They brought fame to Jessel and to the village of Ashland, whose population was less than 5,000. By the early 1940s, hundreds of people a day sought Jessel's treatments. Jessel told a daughter that Jessel's parents recognized she had a special gift shortly after her birth in North Carolina in 1891. Jessel said her earliest memories were of being carried through the night to lay her hands on those in need. The Ashland Tidings quoted history writer Dennis Powers as saying that a Protestant church in Ashland scorned Jessel and suggested she was a heretic. Powers added, Jessel would dismiss the idea she was a healer, saying only that her Creator did the work, and she would make people feel more comfortable. You know a little bit about that story.
Well, this is before my time, but it's something that Bill shared with me. He said they were so excited they'd finally gotten Life magazine to come and do an article on the Shakespeare Festival, which seemed like a big coup. I mean, there was great excitement among the company, and then the reporter heard about Susie Jessel, and that took his attention, and when the Life magazine issue came out, it wasn't about the Shakespeare Festival. We all have our biases. Now this is a story called War Pilot Leads the Way for Women Aviators, and it was written by Luana Corbin. As a child in Phoenix, Oregon, Mary Jean Barnes Sturtevant saw famed pilot Charles Lindbergh fly over Medford in August 1927 and drop a signed proclamation calling for the advancement of aviation. Mary Jean was hooked. After graduating from Phoenix High in 1939, she became a student at Southern Oregon College of Education. In her science classes, she met young men taking civilian pilot training through the college who asked her if she was interested. She was accepted into the college's program held at the Medford Airport. Sturtevant loved the program and obtained a ground instructor's rating. Though only 19 years old, she taught classes for the Army Air Corps at Medford High and Washington State University before joining the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, known as the WASPs, in 1944. Many people resisted the idea of having women in the Air Corps. Of the 25,000 women who signed up for the WASP program, only 1,074 completed the training. Sturtevant was assigned to the WASP Training Command in California, where she taught thousands of men to fly. The WASPs freed up male pilots for duty overseas and paved the way for today's female military pilots. It's you. It's you.
Oh, so we've learned about aviators, and we've learned about strawberry pickers and a few other women's jobs in the area. Well, here's one that is kind of surprising. Women Mine Gold in Southern Oregon 100 years ago, written by Alice Mullally. We like her writing. We like them all. We like them all. But before she was a miner, Mrs. Weisenbacher played the role of Miss Pipes in the Anna Held Company's theatrical performance titled The Little Duchess. But in 1903, she decided to join her father and brother at their Forest Queen hydraulic mine near Grants Pass. The former Miss Pipes told a Mining Review reporter in 1904, "Though I had become fascinated with the life behind the footlights, I am equally so with the life of a gold digger in Southern Oregon." The reporter described her as a handsome woman busily engaged about the diggings, separating mercury from gold and bucking boulders at bedrock. Well, nearby, Mrs. M.E. Moore worked her own mine as an expert piper who handled the huge placer nozzles used to blast tons of dirt from the hillsides to be processed for gold. "Mining is the life for me. I love it," she told the reporter. And in 1912, the president of the Oregon Mining Association was a woman, Mrs. L.B. Bartlett, who spoke at the Southern Oregon and Northern California Mining Congress in Medford. She had prospected all over the West and owned the Great Northwestern Mining and Milling Company. They aren't just homemakers. And here's a woman who plays a big role in women's history and Oregon's history as the first female doctor overcomes gender discrimination, written by Kernan, the birthday boy, Turner. Dr. Bethenia Owens Adair once said, "The regret of my life up to the age of 35 was that I had not been born a boy, and was hampered and hemmed in on all sides simply by the accident of gender." She was an infant when her parents joined the Oregon Trail's Great Migration of 1843. By age 14, she had only 3 months' schooling, was married, had a child, and was living in a 12 by 14-foot cabin in Roseburg, Oregon. She divorced, completed school, studied to be a milliner, and set up shop making high-fashion hats and dresses. At age 30, she enrolled her son in college. Her inquisitive mind led to the study of Gray's Anatomy, which piqued a desire to become a doctor. Few medical schools admitted female students, so she studied and practiced alternative medicine and didn't receive a traditional medical degree until she was 40. As one of Oregon's first female physicians, she established a successful medical practice in Portland, Oregon, married, and became a leading suffragette and advocate of prohibition. I read this and I think what she had accomplished when she was 14, and then by 30 to divorce, to get her own occupation as a milliner, then to become a doctor, and then she fought so hard for as a leading suffragette. She also had some very controversial views that we decided not to read those stories.
Does that whet your curiosity? Tell them.
Well, she was. She had a strong feeling that certain people should be sterilized if they were in prison or had done something that she didn't approve of, and felt that that should become law, which evidently wasn't so unusual for her times. But when we look back, it's another thing that we've talked about. We read these stories and we think, oh, how could that be? And then we just realize for the times, that's what it was. So. We have quite a series, actually, and as it was, there's maybe 4 stories about her, different aspects of it. One, all right, I'll tell them that one, where the male doctors didn't approve of her becoming a doctor, so they thought they would shame her. And there is an as it was story about it, but they decided to shame her by telling her that she had to perform an autopsy on a male. And she said, okay, and she did it. Oh, the town was in an uproar, and how could she do this? And she said, what's the difference? If a male is doing it on a female, or I'm doing it on it, well, some of the men quit. There was all kinds of uproar.
Here's another way that women, with their resourcefulness, found a way to earn money. It's another Alice Mullally story called Railroads Offer Women Opportunity to Prosper. As Ashland, Oregon became a railroad center after 1890, women seized on an unusual opportunity to prosper. Inexpensive vacant lots between the town and the railroad offered widows, divorcees, and other single women a chance to buy property and rent out homes to itinerant railroad workers and their families. A single woman by choice, Belle Anderson, received a rental home as a gift from her father, and the rental income supplemented her small salary at the Ashland Tidings. Widowed in 1902 with 4 small children, Mattie Brown's main income came from renting a small house her husband had built next to their home. She took in laundry, earning $1 for every 24 pieces. Her children sold fruit to the passengers on the train to help out. Eventually, she bought another rental house. Margaret Hicks built several rentals after her husband died in 1900, with the income of $10 per month per house. She put 3 children through college. The Table Rock Sentinel newsletter, published by the Southern Oregon Historical Society, estimated that between 1895 and 1910, 19 women owned property in Ashland's railroad district. The ranch women.
Oh, the ranch women. So Shirley mentioned the Table Rock Sentinel, and that is a wonderful publication that was put out by the Southern Oregon Historical Society. It is available online now through the Southern Oregon Historical Society website, and it was so much research was done about our local history. Interesting stories. It went on for years. There's also an index to it. We have copies of it upstairs in the reference department. The Ashland Library, Medford Library has it. So it's a wonderful source if you're looking for more information about our local history. So we've gone ranch, we've gone mining, we've gone strawberry picking. How about railroads? Railroads oh no, that's what you just read. I'm on ranch women. All right, here we go. This is the one that really puts my life to shame, I think. Ranch Women Survive in Difficult Circumstances by Alice Mullally. The Brown girls, Jenny, Mary, and Emma Jean, were born in Oregon in the 1860s. They grew up shifting summer and winter between the family's two properties, spending winters on a gold claim on Sterling Creek out of Jacksonville, and summers on a large cattle ranch east of Eagle Point. Each of the girls married a local rancher and remained neighbors as adults. Jenny had 7 children and kept house for her husband and ranch hands, carded and spun wool, kept a garden, fed orphaned livestock, educated her children, and did other things in between. By 1910, Mary and Emma Jean were widows with young children. They had the same responsibilities as their sister Jenny, besides managing their ranches. Emma Jean and her 3 boys developed a purebred Hereford, I practiced that word, Hereford cattle herd. This required careful record keeping. Money was always tight. Unlike her father, Emma Jean didn't have access to a jar of gold dust from his mine when expenses came up. What all the Brown women had was determination, nearby family support, and a culture where neighbors looked after one another. They succeeded in difficult circumstances. I'm never going to complain about a busy day.
And here's one of those stories that links local people with worldwide events. It's called Rogue Valley's Dorothy Connor Survives Lusitania Sinking. And once again, it's a story from Alice. On May 1st, 1915, Dorothy Connor and her brother-in-law, Dr. Howard Fisher, sailed on first-class tickets on the British luxury liner, the RMS Lusitania. They were headed for World War I hospital work in Belgium. Dorothy wrote to her mother near Jacksonville, Oregon, that it would be a very boring crossing, and she hoped something exciting might happen on their last day. It did. At lunchtime on May 7th, passengers heard a loud explosion as a torpedo slammed into the liner. They rushed to the deck as the ship began to list. Fisher scrambled to find life vests, and Connor watched as 2 lifeboats hit the water and flipped over. When Fisher returned with the vests, the ship righted itself, and a crew member announced the ship was not sinking. He was wrong. The Lusitania sank in 18 minutes, with a loss of 1,195 of the 1,959 passengers aboard, including 123 Americans. Connor was sucked under and entangled in ropes and debris before being rescued. Fisher also survived. After several months on the front line in Belgium, Connor returned to her home in the Rogue Valley, her wish for excitement more than fulfilled.
Here's a little character from Jacksonville. Zany Ganung chops down a Confederate flag by Sharon Bywater. One of the early colorful characters of Jacksonville, Oregon, was Zany Ganung. Born Mary Ross in 1818, she moved from Ohio to Southern Oregon in 1853 with her husband, Dr. Louis Ganung, settling in Jacksonville around 1855. Zany had a reputation of being a good woman. But once riled up, watch out. Maybe she took after her twin brother, Colonel John Ross. Zany became legendary for chopping down a Confederate flag with an axe. The story goes like this. During the run-up to the Civil War, Jacksonville was home to immigrants from many parts of the country, predominantly Southern sympathizers of Confederate secession. One night, some of them raised a Confederate flag on California Street, near the Genung's house. When Zany and her husband returned from an all-night medical call, the flag was waving in the breeze. Zany wasted no time. Legend has it that she ran into the house, returning with a gun and an axe. No one doubted her resolve. Zany chopped down the flag and carried it home, where neighbors soon reported seeing smoke rising from the chimney. The flag was never seen again. Oh, this is a good personal story for Shirley to share with us.
Earlier, there had been a story about the 1959 fire on the hillside above Lithia Park. And then I received a letter from Stephen Hess, who, as a high school student, had been present that night at the production of Antony and Cleopatra. And so he wrote me this lovely letter of his experience of the night. And I thought, this is an as it was story. And so for the first time, I tried my hand at chunking his wonderful letter into 2 minutes. And that is one of the reasons that I have such profound respect and admiration and gratitude to the writers who do it all the time. And Stephen lives in Colorado, so I was surprised to hear that he listens to As It Was online regularly, keeps track of us. And so this is my one and only byline, but it's really, Steve wrote it. They're almost all his words. It's called Letter Describes Reaction to 1959 Ashland, Oregon Fire by Shirley Patton. A forest fire threatened the city of Ashland, Oregon and its historic Lithia Park on August 8th, 1959. Steve Hess, son of Ashland's postmaster Parker Hess, was a 17-year-old junior at Ashland High. The blaze started near Jackson Hot Springs and advanced to hills above town. Hess said he and his best friend, Jim Susie, went to a play at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival that night. Neither of us owned a car, so we walked to the theater, Hess said. We could see the fire getting close to the park and town. My most vivid memory was when Bill Patton, the theater's general manager, came out on the stage and announced that he would let people know in time if the fire came into Lithia Park so that they could get to their cars and move them. Every so often, the fire would flare up and light up the stage and audience. At the end, the players were given a big ovation, and we left to walk home. Quite an experience. Well, Steve had the experience from the audience viewpoint, and I had it from the stage. I was playing Iris in Antony and Cleopatra, and the actors who were playing Antony and Cleopatra were both spending the summer in cabins up in Lithia Park. And before they came to the theater that night, they had put everything they could stuff into their cars in it, because they had no idea if there would be a cabin to return to after the show. So it was a major distraction, that fire. And Antony and Cleopatra is a very episodic play. with many shifts of scene across the Roman Empire. And during our rehearsal period, and the show wasn't very far into the run, in fact, we just opened the new theater. And as we watched the trees explode on the skyline, we wondered, oh, are we losing our beautiful new theater so soon? And the cast was on the back porch. I don't know, what would you call it?
Outside the costume shop.
Yeah, was outside the costume shop watching the advancing fire, but no one missed an entrance that night. Concentration was fierce in all directions, on the fire, on the drama, and how, with the sound of the fire in the background, how much more projection was required. And instead of the audience being in a comforting darkness, their faces were illuminated. They looked like rows of cherry tomatoes out there. But fortunately, the wind shifted. We still have Lithia Park. We still have that Elizabethan theater that was built in 1959. And
the show must go on.
It did. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, that was just a mix of different stories from As It Was. There's many, many more. I have quite a few in my notebook here in case we run out of time, in case we had a lot of extra time. But what I find interesting is not just these women's stories and the important people in the daily life, but adding to it from the women of the area and learning more about our area. Something do you repeat that this is from the mythical state of?
No.
Yeah.
No, you tell about who the people are who wrote and give everybody credit.
You give the authors' names. It was funny when I first started looking this up online.
As It Was is a collaboration between the Oregon Historical Society and Jefferson Public Radio. Today's episode was written by Dennis Powers, edited by Kernan Turner, and produced by Raymond Scully. I'm Shirley Patton. I've only done it 4,000 times.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming.